Today's spoiler video is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Use the link below to pre-order your cards today. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Daily War of the Spark spoilers, and today we don't have a ton of cards by number, but good lord, we have some spicy ones, including a planeswalker that we've been waiting for. It's one of the leaked planeswalkers that we kind of thought was probably real, but haven't been talking about because it wasn't officially previewed, and it is out now, and that's the first card we're going to talk about, and I'm super hyped. But before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First off, for all of your preview needs, make sure to check out MTGPreviews.com, sortable, filterable, all that sweet stuff. Also, if you haven't already, it would be so cool of you if you could take a second, click that subscribe button down at the bottom of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's talk some War of the Spark, starting with a new planeswalker, a spicy planeswalker, a long-awaited, previously sort of leaked planeswalker, Karn the Great Creator. So Karn the Great Creator, pretty sweet. 4 mana, colorless, so you can play in any deck, 5 loyalty. It comes into play with a static ability that makes it so basically your opponents are under a Stony Silence. Activated abilities on artifacts your opponent control cannot be activated. Already a pretty powerful effect. +1, you get to turn a non-creature artifact into an artifact creature with power and toughness equals to converted mana cost until the next turn. So you get to have it on defense as well. And then -2, you get to wish for an artifact from outside the game, which means your sideboard primarily. Commander is weird, that's up to your playgroup, but in general, in competitive Magic, it means you get an artifact from your sideboard, reveal it, put it in your hand. So this is basically sort of a Stony Silence for 4 mana in any color, combined with a Karn's Touch +1, combined with a Burning Wish type of effect, but for artifacts. And I think this card is actually really interesting and potentially really powerful. So first off, as far as standard, I don't know how good the static ability is. Really, there's like Treasure Map, maybe there's some weird random artifact deck that this can hate on, but I think the main purpose of Karn here is to grab sweet situational artifacts out of your sideboard. Cards like the Immortal Sun, Sorcerer's Spyglass, Treasure Map, especially cards like Immortal Sun and Sorcerer's Spyglass, they're cards that are insane in certain matchups. If you run into Teferi control, Immortal Sun is one of your best cards, so is Sorcerer's Spyglass, but they're also cards that not every deck can play in the main deck. So with Karn, you kind of have a copy of whatever sweet silver bullet artifact you want out of your sideboard, sitting in your main deck that also does kind of some other things. You do need non-creature artifacts to turn into beaters, I guess, for the most part. I guess you can also kill your opponent's like clues or treasure tokens, 0 converted mana cost artifacts, but really, I think it's standard. The main purpose of Karn is going to be the -2, to tutor artifacts out of our sideboards. On the other hand, in Modern, Karn is already kind of insane because Stony Silence is a very heavily played sideboard card to hate on Tron, to hate on like Affinity style decks, Hardened Scales style decks. So that means there is a lot of utility to having a Karn outside of white. One of the problems with Stony Silence is you can only play in your white decks. Karn, while more expensive, gives you that nice sideboard hate effect against those decks in any color that you want to, which is pretty exciting. The other thing people are hyped about, and Mycosynth Lattice was recently bought out, actually because of the leak of Karn it was bought out, is Karn allows for a pretty sweet new hard lock in Modern, where you can have a Mycosynth Lattice in your sideboard, play your Karn, tutor up Mycosynth Lattice, play Mycosynth Lattice, turn everything into artifacts, and that means all of your opponent's permanents can't be activated, can't use their activated abilities. And the real trick here is that this means your opponent can't tap their lands. Tapping a land is technically an activated ability, so Karn makes it so your opponent just can't use their mana anymore. So this is a combo that's going to be interesting to see if it's good enough to work. The nice thing is you only got to play one Mycosynth Lattice, and you only got to play it in your sideboard, so maybe if you're playing a deck like Tron, you can play a Karn in your main deck, find Mycosynth Lattice when it's good, cast it with all your Tron mana, so we'll see if it actually catches on. Worst case, it's a really cool, janky build-around lock deck for Modern that really didn't exist, at least in as competitive of a form before. You could play Stony Silence, play a bunch of Mycosynth Lattices, but the upside of this aspect of the combo is you don't need a million copies of Mycosynth Lattice to hope you draw into it. You could just play one in your sideboard, find it with Karn, and go on to win. The other place that Karn really shines is in older formats, specifically Vintage, where Vintage is built around the Moxen and other Power 9 cards. Mox Pro, Mox Jet, Black Lotus, these cheap artifacts, and there are artifact decks at the top of the format with Walking Ballista and Arcbound Ravager, shop-style decks. So I think that Karn definitely is in the conversation there. So all around, in Standard, I'm kind of meh on Karn. I think it's fine. Being able to artifact wish from your sideboard is sweet. I don't know how good the static ability is, though. But in older formats, Modern, static ability is a great sideboard effect for certain matchups, and the lock is sweet, and in Vintage, this shuts down a lot of mana in the format. So a really unique, super powerful Planeswalker, and I'm going to be excited to see where Karn the Great Creator shows up. Otherwise, we got another Planeswalker. This one, not as exciting as Karn. Jaya, Venerated Firemage. So 5 mana, 5 loyalty, uncommon Planeswalker, so only a negative ability, which is basically a shock. And then if another red source you would control would deal damage to a permanent or Planeswalker, it deals that much damage +1. We also got Jaya's Greeting, one of Jaya's signature spells. 2 mana, instant speed, 3 damage to a creature, scry 1. So let's go with Jaya's Greeting first, because I've seen a little bit of hype about this card. It's a fine limited removal spell, but as long as we have Lightning Strike in Standard, I don't think any Standard decks will want this. Being able to go to your opponent's face, or go to a Planeswalker, which is going to be very relevant in War of the Spark Standard, is better than being able to scry 1. So we'll see if Lightning Strike rotates and we don't have a direct replacement. Then Jaya's Greeting is probably a pretty fine replacement. On the other hand, Jaya itself is kind of like a watered down version of the third lore counter of Flame of the Cald, or more specifically, it's literally Ember Maul Helion, except on a Planeswalker rather than on a body. Ember Maul Helion didn't really see a lot of play, but maybe there's a deck that can make this work. It's really spicy with Ral's Storm Conduit. If you can play Ral, play Jaya, and do the Storm plan where you're casting and copying instants to trigger Ral. Ral is a red permanent, so you're dealing 2 damage for each shock you cast, not even including the shock damage, or each op you cast, with Ral and Jaya just sitting on the battlefield. So that seems like a fun way to go about it. Maybe it could show up in this is like a mono red card. I don't really know. 5 mana is a lot for mono red. You get to 5 mana, you're getting to the experimental frenzying off part of the game. Is a 5 mana sort of weird version of the Flame of the Cald enough for mono red? I don't know, but that's this type of deck it could fit in Standard, where every Fanatical Firebrand is attacking for 2 and pinging for 2, and Chain Whirler is doing 2 to everything when it comes into play, and you're making a bunch of 2-powered, essentially, Legion Warboss tokens. So we'll see. Jaya Venerated Firemage is unique. I like it in the Storm deck with Ral. Maybe it could show up in mono red, although the 5 mana aspect, a little bit questionable there. We also got Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi, and oh my goodness, this card is a lot of power for a little mana. 5 mana, instant speed, 9. Put 9 +1/+1 counters on a land you control. It becomes a legendary 0/0 elemental with haste named Vitu-Ghazi. It's still a land. So basically, 5 mana, turn a land into a 9/9 at instant speed. That is big. That is, like, in the ballpark, bigger than Verdurous Gearhulk, actually, as far as its mana cost. If you put all the counters on Verdurous Gearhulk, it's an 8/8. Almost as big as Giganosaurus, except it's only double green instead of 5 green converted mana cost symbols. Although, really, if you dig into how this card works, it's kind of reminiscent of some old school big beaters, like Child of Gaia, because since you're activating a land, you're kind of going down that land. I mean, you can tap it for mana, but usually you're not going to want to make a land into a 9/9 and then tap it. So you are kind of going down a mana for the rest of the game in a weird sense. Like, again, you can use it for mana in a pinch, but most of the time it's kind of a waste to make a land into a 9/9 and then just tap it to add mana. That's kind of silly. So it's going to be interesting. The instant speed aspect to this card is really scary. Just a 9/9 blocker by surprise. Of course, to have your land actually attacking right away with haste or blocking right away, you do need 6 mana because you want to put the counters on a land that's untapped. Putting on a tap land is fine. You can like do it end of turn, untap, attack, smash in for a bunch of damage. So it'll be interesting. We do have a lot of +1/+1 counter synergies. Like Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi gets you almost halfway to Simic Ascendancy Vitu-Ghazi all by itself. We have Proliferate synergies, so maybe Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi could work there. We also have Stompy decks, and that's another possibility for Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi. Steel Leaf Champions, Gruul Spellbreakers, Vine Mares, we see these like mostly green, just play huge things, beat you down effect, and a 9/9 for 5, or a 9/9 on turn 6 with haste is a really scary threat in that style of deck. So, gonna be very interesting to see what happens. There's so much power attached to this card for its converted mana cost that I would not be surprised that if it was playable, especially considering the instant speed blowout potential, or leave up your mana, instant speed, make a land in your Bant control deck or whatever, swing in, smash your opponent, or like play your Teferi, untap some lands, use those lands to cast Waking of Vitu-Ghazi. There's all kinds of, I mean, you could even use Wilderness Reclamation to keep going. The other thing to mention with this card is even though the land this makes is legendary, you can put additional copies counters on the same land. So if you draw one, you make a land into a legendary 0/0. If you draw another one and cast it, you can't really put the counters on another land, or you're going to legend rule your own land, but you can put 9 more counters on the first land and have a 18/18, which that's a big creature. That's a really big creature. Also, if you just want to go crazy, you can one-shot people with Inkmoth Nexus. 5 mana means it's probably too much for Modern, but it's still super spicy that you can put 9 counters on Inkmoth, pay 1 to activate it to make it a 1/1 instead of a 0/0, and that's 10 infect counters, smashing someone to death out of the blue, even at instant speed if you want to. So it's like a massive pump spell on lands as well. So again, 5 mana means it probably can't show up in tier builds of Infect. They just don't have enough lands, they're too fast, don't have enough mana. But if you want to jank people out, it's a very spicy way to do it with creature lands like Inkmoth Nexus. Next up, we got Topple the Statue, which kind of a sweet artifact destruction spell, and I like this card for one specific reason. So first off, on level 1, it's blow up an artifact, draw a card for 3 mana instant speed, which is fine. That's something you would play in a commander deck or whatever. The nice part is, if there's not an artifact on the battlefield, you can tap a permanent with it, which isn't efficient. 3 mana to tap a permanent instant speed, that's not ideal, but what this does is if you're playing best of 1 standard on Arena, it gives you a way that you can kind of play an artifact destruction spell in your main deck, because worst case, it's horrible, your opponent has no artifacts, you can always just cycle it away at instant speed by tapping down like a land on your opponent's upkeep, a random attacker, and that if you're in the matchup where there's an Immortal Sun locking you down, or a treasure map that's about to flip, then Topple the Statue gets even better. So I like the flexibility of this card as a way that, while neither half is insane, obviously if you're not killing an artifact, it's not that powerful, but since it does something, even if your opponent doesn't have an artifact, it's a way you could squeeze a card like this into your main deck in best of 1 standard where you don't have access to a sideboard. We also have one old card that we haven't talked about yet, but I wanted to mention because we forgot to talk about it and people have asked about it. So Neoform, 2 mana, sorcery, additional cost, sack a creature, search your library for a creature with the converted mana cost of the creature you sacrificed +1. So if you sack a 2-drop, you get a 3-drop, for example, and then it comes into play with an additional +1/+1 counter. So the comparisons for this card, people throw out Eldritch Evolution. I don't actually think that it's a good comparison. The power of Eldritch Evolution is flexibility. Yes, you're paying 1 more mana, you're not getting that +1/+1 counter, but if you sacrifice a, let's say, a 3-drop to Eldritch Evolution, like Kitchen Finks, you can get a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana piece, which makes it very efficient for finding missing combo pieces. On the other hand, if you sack a 3-drop with Neoform, all you can get is a 4-drop, so it's much more limited in terms of being able to find the combo piece that you need, which actually means Neoform is more similar to 1 Birthing Pod activation or 1 Prime Speaker Vanifar activation. Is it worth it to get one of those activations? I think the question and the answer is maybe. Like, I could see very specific decks wanting this. It's sweet with Journey to Eternity. You like sacrifice something, get something else, get back to something with Journey to Eternity, and have a flip Journey to Eternity. It's cute with Rekindling Phoenix. A lot of the same tricks you use with Vanifar work with Neoform. Like sack Rekindling Phoenix, get a Biogenic Ooze, Phoenix is going to come back. If you can sack a 1-drop and get Flip to Lost, you're able to draw a bunch of cards. But since we have literal Prime Speaker Vanifar in the format, I don't know if this card's actually going to see play. I am not excited about it for Modern. I feel like if you're playing Modern, the flexibility of Eldritch Evolution and its ability to set up combos makes it pretty close to strictly better. Even, I mean, again, I shouldn't use that term so much, but it's hard for me to imagine a deck in Modern that would want Neoform over Eldritch Evolution. I think you're going to have to find a very specific combo that I'm not sure that it exists to make Neoform worth it over Eldritch Evolution. In Standard, I think it's fun, it's cool, maybe Vannifar decks could play it as a backup, but I'm not sure it's worth it to sacrifice your creature to get a creature that costs one more with a +1/+1 counter. Seems kind of risky and limited to me, so we'll see. It's a spicy card. I'm just not sure that it's that competitive of a card. Otherwise, we got a bunch of lower rarity stuff. Saheeli Silverwing, meh, limited. Rune Law Enforcer, meh, probably pretty good in limited, tapping down big creatures for 1 mana. Domri's Ambush, we already have a better version in Standard, I think, with some of the fight cards we have available, but counter on something and fight a creature or a planeswalker, not really bad. And it's not even really fight, you just deal damage to it, which means your creature's not going to die. But at sorcery speed, it's a little bit limited, so we'll see. I think some of the split cards are just better. Martyr for the Cause, if you're heavy, like, proliferate aristocrats, if that's a thing, maybe that could be in the conversation. Death triggers are nice. We do have some Death Matters synergies, but most of these, I think, are limited only cards. I would be surprised to see any of them really seeing play in Standard, unless we find, like, a broken synergy for Martyr of the Cause. So anyway, those have been our daily War of the Spark spoilers for today. So let me know what you think about these cards. What do you think about Karn now that it's revealed? What can it do at Standard? What can it do in Modern? How competitive will the lock be? Will we see tournament decks playing it, or is it just a fun janky thing? What about Jaya? Is that better than it looks? Is 5 mana too much? The lower rarity stuff that we talked about, what do you think about that? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.